The chamber was electric, every eye fixed, every microphone poised to capture what was about to unfold. Cameras blinked in unison, capturing the quiet before the storm, the hushed murmurs that rippled like a tide through the room. The air was thick with anticipation, a tension that felt almost tangible, like the moment before lightning splits the sky. Everyone knew something was coming, but no one could predict just how seismic it would be. Jasmine Crockett stood at the center, her posture calm, unwavering as though she carried the weight of decades of struggle, sacrifice, and unacknowledged service on her shoulders. The critics, the pundits, the self-important commentators, they sat in rows, smug, dismissive, ready to witness what they assumed would be a stumble, a misstep, another opportunity to mock. But the room had misjudged the moment entirely, and then it happened. Senator Tammy Duckworth rose, her voice cutting through the murmur, sharp, unwavering, full of authority and undeniable conviction. "Jasmine Crockett is a true patriot," she declared. The words struck like a thunderclap, reverberating off the walls, igniting every camera, every phone, every heart in the chamber. There was a beat of stunned silence, as though the universe itself paused to register the magnitude of the statement. And then the room erupted. Applause thundered, rolling across the chamber like a tidal wave. Chairs scraped back as people rose to their feet, voices mingling in a single deafening roar of approval. Some shouted her name. Others clapped until their hands ached. The walls themselves seemed to shake with the force of collective recognition. It was electric, relentless, impossible to ignore. A standing ovation that seemed to stretch beyond the room, spilling into the streets, the media, the nation itself. But this wasn't just applause. This wasn't just a moment of public approval. It was the climax of a storm that had been building for months, fueled by doubt, by defiance, by relentless attacks against a figure who refused to bow. Eyes met, whispers rose again, but now with a different tremor, one of awe, one of fear, one of the undeniable understanding that the tides had shifted. The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. What would happen next, now that the walls of arrogance had begun to crumble around them? The applause still echoed, but its reverberations carried more than celebration. They carried significance. In a country divided by headlines and hashtags, where every act of courage was scrutinized through the lens of identity and ideology, this moment mattered. The chamber was not just a room of politicians. It was a battlefield of narratives. Every glance, every whisper, every subtle smirk represented forces that had been working for months to undermine Jasmine Crockett, to diminish her, to cast doubt on her patriotism simply because of who she was, the communities she represented, and the truths she refused to ignore. Crockett had become a lightning rod for critics eager to weaponize division. Her recent confrontations had not gone unnoticed. In heated debates, she had stood firm against dismissive interruptions, shouted down voices and the calculated smears of those who thrived on fear and prejudice. She had challenged policies that marginalized immigrant families, called out lawmakers who cloaked bigotry in legislation, and refused to allow her identity to be a punchline in the political theater of arrogance. Every fiery rebuttal, every piercing truth she delivered had earned her both admiration and vitriol. Critics labeled her confrontational, even radical, but their words betrayed their discomfort with authenticity and moral courage. The chamber that day had felt like the culmination of those months of conflict. Cameras caught the tension, capturing the quiet recognition that something had shifted. The critics, confident in their ability to stage-manage narratives, were caught off guard. Their rehearsed smirks faltered as Duckworth's declaration cut through the noise. For the first time, applause erupted not only in support of Crockett, but against the very forces that had attempted to diminish her. The ovation was more than a cheer. It was a rejection of something darker. It was a statement. Dignity, integrity, and truth would not be silenced. For those watching, the stakes were personal. Progressive, immigrant-friendly, identity-pride-driven audiences saw themselves reflected in Crockett's composure under fire, in her resilience, in the courage to speak truth to power. Pride surged in their chests. They felt the validation of long-overlooked struggles, the acknowledgement that their values, justice, inclusion, empathy, mattered on the grand stage of the nation. And with that pride came an undercurrent of anger, the reminder that prejudice had long tried to claim legitimacy, that arrogance had too often masked itself as authority, and that standing up came at a price. The tension was electric. Every camera flash seemed to underline the moment's gravity. Every whisper a reminder of the battles still raging outside the chamber. Crockett had become more than a politician in that instant. She had become a symbol. And as the applause continued, swelling and echoing, the unspoken truth settled in. This was only the beginning. The eyes of a divided nation had turned toward her, and the world was watching, wondering who would yield, who would rise, and who would define the next chapter. The villains in this story were not monsters of fiction, but men and women cloaked in power and entitlement. Their arrogance polished by years of unchallenged influence. They were the critics who sneered at Crockett's speeches, the pundits who twisted her words into ammunition for their divisive narratives, and the political operatives who saw every step she took as a threat to the status quo. In interviews on social media and in opinion columns, they presented themselves as arbiters of reason and patriotism, but their pronouncements were thinly veiled expressions of condescension and fear. Every dismissive phrase, every mocking tone, carried the weight of entrenched privilege, an attempt to remind Crockett and anyone who dared to stand with her of their proper place. The smear campaigns were precise, relentless, and carefully engineered. Headlines questioned her loyalty, insinuated impropriety, and suggested that her advocacy for marginalized communities was somehow un-American. Every confrontation was cataloged and dissected, clips edited to minimize nuance and amplify controversy. The message was consistent. Crockett was the outsider, the agitator, the one who overstepped her bounds. Behind closed doors, these power players chuckled at the chaos they believed they had orchestrated. They celebrated their ability to weaponize identity, turning it into fodder for political gain. In public, they cloaked their attacks in civility, citing debate and scrutiny, while the undercurrent of prejudice pulsed beneath every calculated remark. But their bravado, though loud, was hollow. For every sneer, there was a tremor of insecurity. For every confident press release, there was a whispered worry that the tides of perception were shifting. The contradictions piled up like loose bricks in a crumbling wall. Champions of freedom who sought to silence voices they disagreed with. Defenders of patriotism who overlooked acts of true service. And custodians of integrity who built careers on gaslighting and deflection. They thrived on appearances, but their foundations were shallow. Their power depended on others' fear, and the moment fear faded, so too did their control. In contrast, Crockett's dignity remained grounded, unwavering, almost radiant in its simplicity. While her critics clung to rhetoric and posturing, she carried the weight of lived experience, moral clarity, and a commitment to justice that no smear could tarnish. Every attack, every slight, every attempt to diminish her only sharpened the distinction between hollow bravado and authentic courage. She did not respond to provocation with anger, but with composure. She did not seek applause for her victories, only the satisfaction of speaking truth. In a room filled with pretense and posturing, she stood like a lighthouse, steady, bright, and unyielding. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Observers, whether allies or neutrals, sensed it instantly. The villain's words, meant to intimidate, now revealed their fragility. Their strategies, meant to undermine, now illuminated their fear. And yet, the chamber of power is rarely quick to self-correct. Smugness persisted. The architects of condescension believed that in time, Crockett would falter, that the applause of one moment could be drowned out by a tide of orchestrated criticism. They did not yet realize that in their attempts to dismantle her, they were forging the weapon that would one day dismantle them. Every insult, every insinuation, every carefully placed headline became fuel. Behind every attack, Crockett sharpened her blade of truth. Each slight honed her resolve, each mockery strengthened her clarity, and each attempt to break her spirit instead crystallized her purpose. The villains may have thought they controlled the narrative, but in reality, they were scripting their own undoing, and the world was beginning to sense it. Jasmine Crockett's story did not begin under the bright lights of a congressional chamber. It began in the quiet spaces of sacrifice, in the relentless pursuit of justice against odds that would have daunted most. From the start, she carried a vision larger than herself, a vision of a country where identity was never a liability, where service and courage outweighed privilege and arrogance. She had walked corridors of power and streets of struggle alike, learning the same lesson over and over. Dignity is earned in the small, unseen battles as much as in the public victories. Her path was paved with grit. Nights that stretched into mornings were spent poring over legal briefs and civil rights cases, drafting arguments that could dismantle systemic inequities, or counseling families whose voices had long been ignored. Sleep was a luxury she could seldom afford, replaced instead by the quiet determination that every word she wrote, every case she argued, mattered. Critics and cynics called her work ambitious or aggressive, but Crockett knew it was necessary. Ambition without purpose is hollow. Hers was fueled by a conviction that justice could not wait for consensus, that the marginalized deserved no less than relentless advocacy. Her identity was inseparable from her mission. As a black woman, as a descendant of immigrant struggles, as someone who understood firsthand the precariousness of opportunity and belonging, Crockett carried more than her own story. She carried the stories of countless Americans who had been overlooked, dismissed, or silenced. Law was her instrument, activism her compass, representation her promise. Every courtroom victory, every speech, every legislative maneuver was a reminder. To serve is to assert that every life matters. Every voice deserves to be heard, every dream is legitimate. But the journey was far from easy. Ridicule followed her like a shadow. In public forums, in media coverage, even in whispered commentary among colleagues, her every move was dissected, criticized, sometimes twisted. Social media, the great amplifier of both admiration and scorn, offered no respite. Memes, headlines, and tweets carried a relentless drumbeat of skepticism, judgment, and condescension. It would have been enough to make anyone falter. Yet Crockett refused. She learned to carry criticism as she carried responsibility, with poise, clarity, and a refusal to be defined by the small-minded or the loud. There were moments of isolation, when the weight of expectation felt almost unbearable. Friends offered sympathy, mentors offered advice, but the ultimate burden belonged to her. Long nights, few allies in certain battles, the pressure of representing more than just herself, all of it could have been crushing. But within those struggles, Crockett discovered the inner well of resilience that would define her public life. Each trial was a rehearsal, each slight a sharpening of resolve, each confrontation a lesson in patience, precision, and timing. Her victories were never just her own. Every bill passed, every legal precedent set, every public speech delivered with dignity was a beacon for those who saw themselves in her story. Her identity became a lens through which the broader American narrative was refracted. The promise of equality, the fight for justice, the relentless pursuit of ideals that transcend party lines or political expediency. She embodied a truth too often ignored, that America thrives when courage is amplified, not silenced, when authenticity is celebrated, not suppressed, when service is recognized as the truest form of patriotism. Little did they know, these trials would prepare her for the exact moment Duckworth spoke. Every long night, every sneer, every calculated smear had been a rehearsal for recognition that could not be staged, applause that could not be bought. In the moment the chamber erupted, it was not just luck or timing. It was the culmination of years of preparation, of perseverance, of unflinching adherence to principle. Crockett had been forged in fire long before the world witnessed it, and now the world could no longer deny it. The journey had shaped her. The struggles had honed her. The sacrifices had steeled her. And as the applause swelled around her, she remained not only composed, but luminous. A figure who embodied courage and integrity, whose identity, lived experience, and tireless service transformed a single statement into a national reckoning. For Crockett, the path had never been easy, but it had always been necessary. And in that necessity lay the power that would reverberate far beyond the chamber walls. The weeks leading up to the moment in the chamber had been a crucible. Jasmine Crockett found herself under relentless fire in hearings, public debates, and media spotlights. Opponents, eager to paint her as abrasive or unqualified, deployed every tactic in their arsenal. Interruptions came as routine, condescending asides as default, and eye rolls as punctuation to arguments they refused to meet on merit. Every session felt less like a forum for policy and more like a gauntlet designed to test her composure, her patience, and her ability to withstand humiliation while still standing tall. Crockett had learned quickly that control of narrative was often not in your words, but in your demeanor. While rivals raised voices, twisted phrasing, or dismissed facts outright, she held firm. Each attempt to provoke a reaction was met with measured calm, a steady gaze, and responses crafted to dismantle arrogance without feeding it. In hearings where interruptions were timed to fluster, she responded with clarity that cut sharper than any raised voice could. In debates where mockery replaced reason, she answered with facts and insight, each sentence carrying the weight of preparation, principle, and lived experience. The chamber became a theater of contrasts. On one side, critics relied on theatrics, smirks, and the casual authority of assumed superiority. On the other, Crockett's presence radiated resolve, dignity, and an almost magnetic focus. The air was charged with tension, every whispered exchange, every subtle gesture scrutinized. Supporters in the audience held their breath. Detractors sharpened their attacks, sensing an undercurrent they could not fully understand. It was a delicate dance of power and perception, and Crockett moved through it with deliberate poise. Her opponents escalated in predictable patterns. Mocking quips were launched, interruptions timed to cut her off mid-sentence, patronizing glances aimed to undermine confidence. Social media pundits amplified each moment, portraying her as aggressive, defensive, or overly emotional. But what they failed to grasp was that each slight, each orchestrated provocation was doing something they could not control. It was sharpening her focus. Every word, every glare, every insult was fuel. The very attacks intended to break her resolve were being absorbed, refined, and transformed into a force more powerful than any smear or ridicule could match. And as the debates unfolded, a pattern emerged. The more rivals tried to unsettle her, the more composed Crockett became. Her answers, precise and unwavering, highlighted the hollow nature of their tactics. The interruptions that were meant to diminish her instead exposed their lack of substance. The eye rolls meant to communicate disdain now revealed insecurity and frustration. And in every moment, the audience, both in the chamber and beyond, began to sense a shift. Confidence was no longer on the side of the provocateurs. It was radiating from the figure they sought to destabilize. By the time the final exchanges began, the tension had reached a fever pitch. The room was taut with expectation, cameras poised to catch a stumble, critics eager for a moment of misstep. Yet Crockett stood calm, resolute, each word deliberate, each pause charged with intention. The stakes had been raised, the lines drawn, and the stage set for a confrontation that would not just test her skill, but define her legacy. And as the final moments of debate approached, it became clear to everyone present. This was more than a clash of policy or rhetoric. This was a reckoning. The air in the chamber was heavy with anticipation, every eye fixed, every breath held. Weeks of tension, months of scrutiny, years of preparation, all had led to this precise moment. Jasmine Crockett rose from her seat with the quiet confidence of someone who had long mastered the art of waiting for the perfect opportunity. The room had expected a confrontation, a stumble, perhaps a misstep. Instead, what they witnessed was precision, calm, and unrelenting truth. She began with measured words, each syllable deliberate, each phrase a scalpel cutting through layers of arrogance. Her voice carried the weight of experience, a cadence that demanded attention without needing to shout. For too long, she began, we have allowed noise to masquerade as authority. We have allowed prejudice to be disguised as reason. And we have tolerated arrogance as if it were a credential for leadership. Today, that stops. A ripple of recognition spread through the chamber. Supporters leaned forward while opponents shifted uncomfortably, caught off guard by the clarity and force of her argument. Her lines landed like precise strikes. Every anecdote of injustice, every statistic, every carefully crafted rebuttal highlighted the contradictions and shortcomings of those who had tried to diminish her. Duckworth's gaze followed each word, approving nods acknowledging the power of the truth being delivered. Meanwhile, the critics who had tried to unnerve her faltered. Hesitations, clipped retorts, and subtle grimaces betrayed the discomfort Crockett had strategically orchestrated without ever needing to raise her voice. The imbalance was palpable, the audacity of her composure against the hollow noise of their aggression. Crockett's words escalated with mounting intensity. She did not need theatrics. The force of her character and the accuracy of her insight were spectacle enough. We are not defined by the doubts of others, she declared, her eyes sweeping the room. We are defined by the courage to stand when standing is hardest. We are defined by the integrity to act when action is inconvenient. We are defined by service, not by the applause of the entitled. Each line landed with the weight of inevitability. The critics' carefully curated facades of authority began to crack. Micro-expressions of disbelief, rapid shifts in posture, subtle murmurs betrayed their unraveling composure. And then, the crescendo approached. Crockett delivered a line so precise, so commanding, that even the most hardened observers had to pause. A call to principle that could not be ignored. A reminder that service, integrity, and truth were not just ideals, but actions. Her opponents tried to respond, but their voices faltered, their timing off. The narrative had shifted, and they knew it. The room, once a battlefield of posturing, had become a stage for clarity, a theater of undeniable merit. It was in that moment that Duckworth rose, her presence authoritative yet graceful. The chamber fell silent, the anticipation palpable. Then came the declaration, a statement that would echo far beyond the walls of the room. Jasmine Crockett is a true patriot. The words hit like a thunderclap, a seismic recognition that validated every struggle, every sacrifice, every long night of preparation. The room erupted. Chairs scraped back as applause rolled like a tidal wave. Standing ovations erupted from every corner, swelling into a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the chamber. Gasps of disbelief spread among opponents, their confidence shattered. Some mouths hung open, some sank into seats, stunned by the unanticipated force of recognition. Cameras flashed, capturing every second, immortalizing every reaction. Supporters wept, some cheering, some laughing in relief as the collective validation of months of struggle surged through the room. The noise was overwhelming, a chaotic symphony of approval and amazement. Every gesture of support, every nod of recognition, every clap of acknowledgement fed the moment, amplifying it beyond anything Crockett could have staged. The standing ovation grew, a tidal wave of approval that seemed unstoppable. The contrast could not have been more dramatic. The hollow confidence of her critics, now fractured and exposed, against the luminous dignity of Crockett, celebrated by allies, witnesses, and history alike. Duckworth remained beside her, nodding, her own expression a mixture of pride and awe, reinforcing the weight of the declaration. It was more than applause. It was a collective exhale, a release of tension, a societal acknowledgement that courage, integrity, and identity had triumphed, and yet, even as Crockett absorbed the moment, the sound, the recognition, the affirmation of her work, there was a sense of the unexpected lingering in the air. She had anticipated applause, but not the scale of the shockwaves, the ripples extending far beyond the chamber walls. Reporters, analysts, and bystanders would soon amplify the moment in ways that even she could not have foreseen. Social media would ignite. Conversations across the country would shift. The narrative she had fought to reclaim would spread like wildfire. But behind the triumph, behind the standing ovation that seemed endless, a quiet tension remained. The moment was electric, intoxicating, and validating, but it was also fleeting. Crockett knew the battles were far from over. The chamber had witnessed a victory, but the forces of arrogance and prejudice still lingered, still plotted, still waited for their chance to reclaim control. And yet in that instance, for that single, perfect moment, she was untouchable, recognized, celebrated. But what happened after the ovation stunned even Crockett herself. The moment the chamber erupted, it did not stay confined to its walls. Within seconds, the declaration had ignited a storm across social media. Hashtags praising Crockett surged into trending lists, appearing on every platform with relentless velocity. Our True Patriot, Jasmine Crockett, and our standing ovation dominated feeds, each tweet, post, and story amplifying what had just unfolded in real time. Memes flooded Twitter and X, some humorous, some reverent, but all carrying the unmistakable undertone. The world had just witnessed something extraordinary. Reels captured the wave of applause, the gasps of disbelief, and the collective eruption of recognition. Within hours, clips were shared across continents. Her composure, clarity, and the power of Duckworth's endorsement becoming a viral emblem of courage and dignity. Supporters poured in from every corner, their voices swelling into a chorus that refused to be ignored. Activists, community leaders, and ordinary citizens alike hailed Crockett as a national voice for justice and integrity. Letters and messages flooded inboxes. Emails from grassroots organizations praised her courage. and online communities celebrated her as a symbol of perseverance. It was no longer a political moment confined to a single chamber. It had become a cultural milestone. People from immigrant communities, civil rights groups, and progressive circles felt seen in a way they hadn't before. Her triumph was theirs, and their voices amplified the message. Service, resilience, and authenticity could not be silenced. Media commentators scrambled to contextualize the event, replaying her words, dissecting the reactions, and highlighting the stark contrast between Crockett's composure and her opponent's faltering. Cable pundits debated the implications, while opinion columns underscored the significance of the endorsement from Duckworth, herself a symbol of service and sacrifice. Celebrities weighed in, sharing clips and commentary that spread the story beyond political circles. Late-night hosts referenced the standing ovation, blending admiration with incredulity. The moment transcended partisan lines, capturing attention precisely because it carried the weight of authenticity in a climate accustomed to spectacle. Meanwhile, the critics who had tried to undermine Crockett found themselves in damage control mode. Analysts scrambled to reframe the narrative. Social media managers attempted to downplay the virality, and advisors counseled restraint. Interviews were carefully scripted, statements cautiously worded, yet the momentum was unstoppable. The applause, once confined to the chamber, had become a tidal wave no denial could stem. Each attempted rebuttal only underscored their dissonance. Their previous attacks now looked petty, reactionary, and hollow against the backdrop of a public who recognized both courage and truth. Everywhere, the ripple effects began to spread. Journalists connected the moment to larger themes: the fight for representation, the courage to confront arrogance, and the power of persistence in the face of relentless opposition. Podcasts discussed her speeches, newsletters highlighted her journey, and online forums dissected her words with admiration. Even those who had not supported her previously found themselves reconsidering assumptions. It was a cultural inflection point, one that would linger in conversations, classrooms, and dinner tables for weeks to come. And yet, the ripple effect was only beginning. While the applause had faded in the chamber, the consequences of the moment were accelerating beyond control. Every share, every post, every analysis multiplied the significance exponentially. The recognition of her bravery had created a narrative that could not easily be reversed. A narrative that challenged old power structures, amplified underrepresented voices, and reshaped perceptions of what patriotism truly meant. The storm had been ignited, and even Crockett, with all her foresight and preparation, could not have fully anticipated how far it would reach, how deeply it would resonate, or how many hearts it would touch. In the days following the eruption of applause, the significance of the moment began to crystallize. Jasmine Crockett's triumph was not merely personal, it was symbolic. She reframed the attacks, the ridicule, the endless criticisms into a lesson that transcended politics. True patriotism is not defined by volume, by posturing, or by hollow declarations of superiority. It is measured by sacrifice, by service, by the courage to act for the greater good even when recognition is delayed or denied. Every slight that had been hurled her way now appeared as part of a larger narrative, one where resilience and integrity carried far more weight than the empty bravado of those who sought to diminish her. Senator Tammy Duckworth's role in that moment reinforced the message in a way that words alone could not. As a veteran, Duckworth's endorsement carried the resonance of lived sacrifice. She had served, she had bled, and she had faced dangers that demanded courage beyond any speech or debate. By rising to declare Crockett a true patriot, she validated not just a single politician, but the principles that Crockett had embodied for years: service over self-interest, principle over popularity, and action over posturing. The weight of Duckworth's own history amplified the lesson. Patriotism is earned through commitment to others, not through the hollow assertion of entitlement or the loud dismissal of those who challenge power. In this reframing, the standing ovation transformed from a simple act of recognition into a mirror reflecting America's hunger for dignity over division. The applause was no longer just for Crockett. It was for what she represented. It was a collective acknowledgement that courage matters, that integrity can prevail, and that society has a deep, unspoken yearning to see justice validated. The ovation captured something larger than a single chamber or a single vote. It captured a national aspiration, A desire to witness leadership that elevates rather than belittles, that unites rather than divides, that inspires rather than intimidates. Crockett herself became both a symbol and a vessel for hope. Her journey, marked by sleepless nights, relentless scrutiny, and tireless advocacy, now illuminated a pathway for others. Those watching, particularly progressive, immigrant-friendly, and identity-pride-driven audiences, found validation in her resilience. They saw the possibility of triumph without compromise, recognition without surrender, and courage without apology. It was a reminder that the work of justice and equality is arduous, but meaningful victories, however hard-fought, can shift perceptions, inspire action, and redefine cultural narratives. The broader lesson was unmistakable. When integrity, service, and authenticity confront arrogance and pretense, the impact resonates far beyond any single moment. Crockett's poise, Duckworth's affirmation, and the collective response of the chamber created a narrative of hope. One that reassured viewers that resilience matters, that ethical action is noticed, and that progress is possible even amid opposition. The story offered a vision of justice not as an abstract ideal, but as a tangible, achievable outcome when individuals dared to embody it. In the end, the moral crescendo was clear. Courage, dignity, and sacrifice can ignite collective recognition. Service can redefine patriotism. Resilience can outlast derision. As the echoes of applause faded into history, the lesson remained. America thrives when its citizens act with integrity, when its leaders elevate principle over ego, and when communities recognize and celebrate the true meaning of dedication. The chamber had witnessed a moment of drama, but the nation had glimpsed a universal truth, one that promised hope, inspired resilience, and reaffirmed the enduring pursuit of justice. As the cameras dimmed and the chamber returned to its usual hum of deliberation, the moment lingered. Unforgettable, electric, transformative. Senator Tammy Duckworth's declaration had cemented Jasmine Crockett not just as a political figure, but as a symbol of modern patriotism. Together they embodied what America longs to see: courage over convenience, dignity over arrogance, service over self-interest. The standing ovation, the applause, the collective recognition, all were more than theater. They were a declaration that integrity still commands attention, that truth still resonates, and that values rooted in sacrifice and justice are worthy of celebration. The story carries a simple, undeniable clarity. Arrogance may roar, but dignity prevails. Noise and posturing cannot mask substance. Performative power cannot outshine authenticity. Crockett's steadfastness, paired with Duckworth's affirmation through lived experience, created a lesson in patriotism that is as timeless as it is urgent. It reminded viewers that being a true patriot is not about grandstanding or empty slogans. It is about action, commitment, and an unwavering dedication to the greater good. And now, this moment can extend far beyond a single chamber, far beyond the headlines and hashtags. If you believe patriotism is about truth and service, not hate, share this story. Let the courage of Jasmine Crockett, validated by Duckworth and witnessed by millions, inspire your own actions. Let it spark conversations, awaken empathy, and fuel the belief that integrity can triumph over arrogance. Spread the message, honor the principle, and join a movement of recognition, hope, and resilience. The applause may fade, but the impact, rooted in dignity, justice, and service, can echo indefinitely.